Jeeva and Salojana Sam are on a mission to save marriages in Canada, and they have a big goal. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But before I bring them on, consider this. Last year, there were 2.74 million people who obtained a legal divorce in Canada. And that figure has been steadily increasing since 2000, where there were 1.88 million people who ended their marriage that year. And about 40% of marriages in this country end in divorce. It is sad and heartbreaking. But the Sams are going to be doing something about that. They have a book that will soon be coming out. It's called The Unbreakable Marriage. Guys, welcome to 100 Huntley Street. Good to see you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Yeah.
Now, before we talk about this big goal for the next 5 years to save marriages, what led you guys to want to get into this to try to prevent marriage breakup?
Well, interestingly enough, it actually all started with 100 Huntley Street many years ago. Over 10 years ago, we were invited to be one of 3 couples that were chosen to follow the Love Dare for 40 days and put out a video blog about it every day. And so at that time, people started to contact us about helping with their marriages. And we weren't quite ready for it. Slojana was, but I wasn't. And so as a pastor, I'd just seen too many marriages and the stress. And I know how much it would take out of us to do that. And so she kept on praying that God would open up a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Members of our congregation would come and ask us, are you going to do that 40-day love dare again? Because it was very helpful. And that was like a Holy Spirit saying, there is a need. And, I felt the calling. But whenever I talked to Jeeva, he wasn't ready. He said, these were his words, they will suck the life out of us. And so I just left it. And yeah, so, and every so often again, people will come and ask us. And I knew there was a calling, in our life to do this. And finally, Jeeva got the nudge.
Yeah, well, what happened was I was mentoring some men, mostly entrepreneurs in the business place, the marketplace, and they were all doing quite well. And all of a sudden, it seemed like they were hitting the ceiling and couldn't move any further. And so I'm praying about, Lord, what's going on here? Why are these guys not making the progress they should make? And I heard this very, very clearly. Ask them about their marriage. And when I asked them about their marriage, it seemed like that was the common denominator. The marriage was either tanking or it was not in great shape. And then again, the Lord orchestrates these things in ways that we cannot do ourselves. Within a very, very short span, I had 4 or 5 calls from people. Many of them were in leadership positions in the church, not all pastors, but leadership positions, calling and saying, hey, you got to help us with our marriage. And so at that point, I pretty well got pinned into a corner and saying, well, I can't say no anymore, Lord. Okay, we'll do something.
Wow, and you're doing amazing things. By the way, I watched the Love Dare. And Jeeva, I just appreciated your honesty, and I know that was a big turn in your marriage, so way to go. So you guys have been married over 38 years. Interesting, because in the Indian tradition, it was an arranged marriage. You didn't know each other before you got married, and we'll talk about that at another time. But, as you look at getting a healthy marriage, what are some of the things that need to be addressed?
The first thing I would say is communication. Any challenges you have, you'll be transparent enough to talk to each other, communicate and get it resolved. That's the first thing.
Yeah, and part of it is like your cultural expectations, of how you saw your parents communicate. A lot of it influences the way that you communicate. And in our case, I was not very great at communicating at the level of feelings. And so we had coping mechanisms. So for example, when there was a conflict, I would just let it all out, whereas with Slojana, what did you do when you had conflict?
Yeah, it was the silent treatment, and that wasn't the greatest.
Yeah, communication is so important. And, having done, marriage counseling, mostly to couples that are getting married, including in my own kids, is that is such an area, communications and learning some of the negative things and positive things from your parents. Like if your dad was sarcastic to your mom, that can also be a problem. So, we really have to identify and, work on it, that's why I'd recommend the book. Now, on your website, thesams.ca, right at the top of the webpage, you say, your marriage can survive any crisis. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, but you believe that. Why?
Well, from experience, we know that, we have helped couples overcome any kind of crisis that they may have experienced in their marriage. And one of the reasons why we are so confident is that there are two very fundamental principles on which we base our marriage mentorship and help people overcome, any crisis and not just survive, but actually, even thrive. And the number one principle is that there are no such things as marriage problems per se, but two individuals with their own problems coupled together in a marriage. And together they will give birth to marriage problems. And so rather than tackling the problems, rather than tackling the crisis at hand, what we do is we take each of those people individually and say, okay, what did you bring into the marriage? What kind of baggage, what kind of hurts, did you carry that you have now brought in? And because it's not the crisis that causes problems, it is how you respond to the crisis. And a crisis, we like to say often, does not actually cause cracks in a marriage. It exposes the cracks that are already there in the marriage. And a lot of times the cracks have to do with what each person brought in. And so that's one of the number one things that we find, that once we start addressing those problems and helping people to overcome them and come to terms with them, to solve them, to get healing for them, then they're able to survive the crisis and thrive.
So let's talk about this big goal. Over the next 5 years, you would like to save 50,000 marriages. I mean, that's pretty ambitious. How do you plan to do that?
Well, publishing the book is definitely a first step. And we're not just publishing a book, we're also producing a workbook to go with it. And so a couple can pick up the book and the workbook and then work their way through it. What we actually recommend for best results is for a couple not to do it on their own, but to actually find a mentoring couple. It might be somebody in their family, somebody in their church that has been married maybe 10 years, something like that, who can keep them accountable, who can help them through some of the things that they may be called to do. So that is our number one step. But then our second step, Slojan.
Yeah, we are also training other mentors like us, especially those who have gone through our marriage mentorship itself, because they'll know the process. So we are picking a few people, to mentor them and train them so that they can also do the same thing, because we cannot do everything ourselves.
Yeah, it's the Jesus strategy, right? You disciple and then you make them disciplers. So in a similar way, we mentor and then we make them mentors so that it gets duplicated, because there's no way that on our own, we're going to reach a significant number of people if we were the only ones doing it.
Yeah, and that's such an important part, that if you want to see things change, we need to raise up other people and really in the church be committed, to marriage. I mean, this is God's institution. So you talk about the 12 weeks that this can happen. What are some of the key points that you want to cover during those 12 weeks that if people say, okay, I'm all in, maybe my marriage is mediocre, maybe it's in trouble, but what can happen in those 12 weeks?
Well, we always begin with an assessment of where everybody is at in their marriage. And so, we have certain tools that we use. And once we find out where they're at, the first thing we actually teach people to do is to shift the spiritual atmosphere in their home. Because, you can learn all the techniques that you want, about how to get things back on track. But if you're not in an atmosphere that promotes growth, it's going to be counterproductive. And so we teach people to do that with some daily habits. And we established a very strict protocol of accountability. And so people who are coming to our 12-week process, actually, we expect them to be accountable to us on a daily basis, by checking off the daily things that they need to do. And then we move into a very significant portion of the mentorship, which is?
Yeah, it's called, removing spiritual blockages. Now that will include forgiveness, forgiving others, forgiving themselves. And then, there's all the different, the inner healing that we put them through, for deeper wounds. So we have some trained people that we send them to get the inner healing. And then if they need further, help, then we send them to other professional therapists, where they'll, people who have gone through trauma or, abuse in their childhood. It can go back up to their childhood, and they'll get all the healing that they need, because these are some of the things that hinder, the marriage problems, to have that intimacy and the close unity in the marriage. So, yeah.
Yeah. Another big thing that we cover is actually about conflict, because conflict is an inevitable part of all marriages. And so, but how do we bring conflict out into the open in a constructive way? And how do we move from getting into the place of conflict to a place where we have restored the peace, but we have also resolved, the issue that caused the conflict in the first place? And so once we teach people how to do that, because one of the things, unfortunately, we have found, and this was true of our marriage as well, where there were times when, there was an issue that needed to be talked about and confronted, but we wouldn't bring it up because we were afraid of how the other person would respond to it. So we teach couples how to do that. And then the last big thing that we do is we help them to replace patterns that they have gotten into that have not been helpful. So this could be with communication patterns, with the way you make time for each other, with your finances, with boundaries, etc. And along the way, when you do all this together, we find that there's a change that happens in the level of intimacy. A lot of times people come to us in a state of sexual dysfunction. And once you go through all of this, then that automatically gets restored. Then we teach them some additional things, which we won't talk about today.
Yeah, well, and we've run out of time already. So people got to get the book, The Unbreakable Marriage. The SAMS.ca is how you can order. It's coming out real soon. And, marriage is not easy. I know my marriage was in trouble a number of years ago, sought out counseling. And now I'm, just enjoying marriage. And I see so many couples around me that are really struggling. We definitely need people to help and give us tools and deal with the things that we need to deal with, and the honesty that needs to be there. So, Sams, thank you guys so much. It was good seeing you, and we'll look forward to the book being out real soon. So again, people will watch for that. God bless you guys, and thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you.